Welcome back. Today we're going to be answering your questions. I posted a video last week announcing this AMA, and you guys posted a ton of questions in the comments. I won't be able to answer all the questions in this video, but if I don't answer your question, I'll do what I can to answer it in the comments of the last video. So let's get going. There were a lot of questions about my work as a therapist. And some of my response to this may be different from where you live. So I live in the United States, I live in Idaho, and every state is different when it comes to therapists just because every state has a licensing board that decides how they want to call, like what they want to call therapists, different rules and regulations for therapists, that kind of thing. So how I'm talking about this may be different than your specific area just because of that. My undergraduate degree is in sociology, and then after I completed my undergrad, I went straight into grad school. My graduate degree is in social work. It was like a 2-year program for my graduate degree, and I believe every state allows social workers to practice therapy. I could be wrong about that, but at least every state that I am licensed in allows me to practice therapy as a social worker. The nice thing about being a social worker is that I can do therapy, like that is one option for the work that I can do, but if I ever get burnt out on therapy or if I want to do other things, the social work degree or license allows me to do other things besides therapy. So I can, work in schools, I can work in hospitals, I can work for insurance companies. I don't know, there are a lot of other things that you can do as a social worker. It's very versatile in that way. Other degrees that let you do therapy, so counselors, just a technical degree, licensed in marriage and family counselors, psychologists, those degrees or those licenses don't always let you do other things. You're kind of stuck doing therapy. And all of these things have a really high rate of burnout. It's really hard to hear about the really shitty things that people can do to each other again and again and again. And so what I like about social work is the fact that if I ever do feel like I'm getting burnt out, I can do other things. That is a huge advantage that I feel social workers have. I graduated in 2015, so it's 2021 now, in case anybody's watching this video in the future. I've been doing therapy for about 6 years now. 7 if you count the internships that I had to do as part of my graduate degree. There were a lot of questions about why I wanted to be a therapist. And when I went into school, realistically, I had no life experience. None of us do. When we're 18, which is the very traditional age of going into college, what life experience do we have? And I feel like going into therapy was this merge of an interest in people and how people work and operate, but then I didn't know what to do with that. And therapy and social work was a job that seemed like a way to take that interest, but also do something with it. Hence, therapy and social work. There were also a lot of questions about how I want to structure the channel, how many times I'll post a week, how I want to handle spoilers. Right now, what I'm aiming for is to post every other day. I'm not quite sure if that's what the channel will look like in the future, if I'm honest. I'm recording and editing videos around my work with clients and everything that I do with my family. So I'm aiming for every other day, and I'm hoping that I can keep that up. As far as spoilers go, I would love it if the spoilers could be tagged. That way I can decide if I want to read them. Other people can decide if they want to read them. And that way I can read through the rest of the comments. If there's feedback on how I'm doing the videos or editing the videos, I can still read through those and I'm not just skipping through every single comment. I see the spoilers a bit like the content warnings. In video games, if they're there, we can decide what we want to do with it from that point on. And then people who've played the game, they can click on the spoiler and then go from there. That's how I see spoilers. There were a lot of questions about video games and like how video games fit into my life. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents got me the original Game Boy Black and White. And it wasn't even the Game Boy Pocket Black and White one that was slimmer. This is like the chunky one. And I remember playing the Black and White Jungle Book game. And I remember it because there was this really long gap that you had to jump over, and I could never get it for the longest time. I've never been good at platformers, and people have been asking me to play Celeste, and it's kind of been on my radar for a little bit, but oh man, those jumps! Woo! And so I played the Pokemon games, right? There was Red and Blue and Yellow. Those are the ones that stick out to me that I played on those original Game Boys. And because I remember I had that chonky Game Boy, and then I had the Game Boy Black and White Pocket, and I would hook them up and trade the Pokemon between the two of them. And I know I'm not the only person who did this. And I really had a lot more of the handheld game consoles. Is that what we call them? A lot more of the Game Boys until the folding one, I think. The Game Boy Advance SP, is that what it was? I don't know. And then I didn't have an actual console until... Wait, I had a Dreamcast with like 2 games for a while. But then I really got into consoles with the PlayStation 2. But somewhere in the middle there, my parents really wanted me to play puzzle games. They really wanted me to do more educational stuff. So I had the Nancy Drew games. And every year I'd get one of those Nancy Drew games. So if you've ever played those point and click, they still make them every year, I believe. If you've ever played those point and click games, I played those for a very long time. So when I think of games that I used to play, or like games in my childhood, I think of Pokemon. I don't really think of console games because I didn't have a console game until I was probably a teenager. My parents just weren't a fan of console games. But then when I was a teenager, I had the PlayStation 2, and I think my first real console game was Kingdom Hearts 2, even though I'd never played Kingdom Hearts 1. And then I had the Assassin's Creed games, and all of that frustration of trying to get into the temples, is that what they were? With the timed sections, all of that stuff. And to me, the consoles always seemed more accessible. I was not super into computers, and so I knew that PCs could do like more intensive stuff, but I didn't know how to make that happen. And so the idea of mentally trying to figure out what video cards or graphics cards, like what do I do with that? That was just a little too much. And you know, you're not an adult yet when you're a teenager. And so how do I figure all that out? Couldn't do it. Whereas a console, it's a built-in package, and so that always seemed more accessible to me, so I just stuck with consoles for the longest time. It's been only fairly recently that I've leaned more into actual PC games, because PC gaming is more has more longevity. There's kind of those pros and cons in my mind, because you upgrade your PC, the game itself is still there, assuming there's not all that copyright or contract stuff that happens behind the scenes, right? So it's only fairly recently that I got into PC games. So that's how gaming really started for me. I just grew up with it. Oh, there were questions about my pets. I do have pets. I don't know if I can easily put pictures in the video, but I do have pets. I have 3 cats and 1 dog. The dog's name is Gotham because, of course, Batman is objectively the best hero ever. And a friend gave me the idea because then I could tell people I have to go home, Gotham needs me, which is great, classy. And I have 1 cat named Boo, 1 cat named Ayami, and 1 cat named Phobos. Boo is also the best cat, objectively, out of all of them. He is the cutest. There were also questions about my channel, like how it came to be, if it's a passion project. I have noticed that there's been a little more conversation about how mental health shows up in movies and TV shows. I say that it's fairly recent because there's so much stigma about mental health, and that stigma means that we don't always talk about it. But I feel like fairly recently there's been a little more conversation about how it shows up in media. And there is a huge amount of stigma with it. But mental health impacts all of us. It's everywhere. Why not talk about it? The more we talk about it, the less stigma there is. And what I've noticed is that there's also stigma about video games. Sometimes when there's something horrible that happens in the world, video games get to blame, which isn't really fair. Video games don't just cause chaos and mayhem. So even though mental health is starting to be talked about in other forms of media, it's not being talked about as far as how mental health shows up in video games. But it does show up in video games. Probably the easiest example to talk about is the fact that it's such a huge trope in horror games in particular, that, you know, all these horrible things are happening, and then at the end of the game it's like, surprise, you're the one doing these horrible things, and you don't know about it, or you don't remember it because of, see, mental health, right? Schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, right? Pick your thing with that. And that irks me, really does bother me, because when we talk about mental health in that way, it just adds to the stigma, and it's such a common trope. And when something is so common that it's a trope, that definitely adds to the stigma. And it's a difficult topic because I don't want to say we can never have that show up. But I feel like it should be done in a way that is well crafted, where it's not leaning into the trope. It's done in a way where it's done purposefully. Like jump scares. You know, is the jump scare there for kind of a cheap scare because you couldn't think of anything else, or is it a purposeful thing that somehow adds to the plot? It's kind of like the concept of Chekhovs gun. Everything that you put into what you write, what you create, whatever, does it have a reason? Is it going to be used later on? Does it add to character development? Or are you just putting it in there to put it in there? So I'm not saying that we can't ever use this stuff, right? Because again, the point is to talk about mental health. I'm not saying that we have to hide it away and bury it away, because that doesn't help either. But I'm saying, let's not make it something to be scared of, something that we have to feel afraid of. Let's talk about it in a way that feels accurate, for lack of a better word. So I've noticed these tropes in video games, especially horror games. And I thought, who else to talk about it? Don't get me wrong, there are other YouTubers who point out these things and comment on these things, but as a therapist, I thought that I could add to the conversation in a way that maybe other people weren't adding to it. So that's something that I thought of, but I never really created the YouTube channel until a friend of mine really poked and prodded me and said, no, like, you really should do this. Ironically, I will link her YouTube video wherever it ends up. Because she had a YouTube of her own, and she was basically saying, no, you should do this. So that's a big reason why the YouTube started off the way it did, is I felt like these things weren't being talked about in a way that they could be talked about. Having said that, though, with the job that I do, I don't want to burn myself out. So will there be times when I'm playing games where mental health isn't a huge aspect? Probably. Just because I don't want to burn myself out in those types of games. There were a couple questions on if I was going to play other horror games or psychological horror games soon, and that is the plan. Amori is such a long game. Such a long game. I'm discovering that more and more as I play it through, and I'm starting to kind of have plans or thoughts to add other games here and there in the middle of it, to kind of break it up, to, again, kind of goes back to the idea of burnout, to help make it feel like I'm not going to burn myself out while I'm doing all of this. So that is something that I want to do. And if I'm talking about mental health, usually the games that come to mind are horror games and psychological horror stuff. So much of thriller and psychological horror, so much of that genre, I guess, for lack of a better term, often is mental health, or it involves some form of mental health, because again, mental health is everywhere. So often I find myself gravitating towards those games. So I do have plans to go back to those games. Also, I like horror. Me as a person, I like horror. There is a certain comfort in knowing that the anxiety that you feel from horror is going to end. I also just like I like getting my adrenaline from something fictional rather than real life. It's kind of like when you watch, for lack of a better term, trashy TV. I would much rather get my drama from my media than from my life. It also kind of feels like that aspect. So I, in general, like horror. I like my scares to have a certain endpoint that is predictable. So I like horror. So yes, I will probably go back to those games. So there's a question about what do I deal with most with my patients? And I have found with my work that I really like working with anxiety and trauma. Sounds kind of bad to say, but trauma is really shitty. It is. But I like those moments when people realize that they are able to do way more than they were able to do before. Sometimes people are saying, you know, I can't work out, I can't talk to my significant other, I can't, you know, whatever. And their trauma stops them, their anxiety stops them. And through therapy, they get to this point where they're doing those things. They're working out, they're talking to their significant other. And usually therapy is so sneaky that they don't realize that they're doing it because progress is slower than we'd like. But that means that they've started doing that and they didn't even realize it. And to have those moments where we can say, holy shit, I've made progress. I've overcome this really scary thing in my life. I really like that. I like people being able to heal from things that seemed so terrifying and debilitating at one point in their life. So I've honestly just specialized so much of my work. As therapists, we need to get training after our degree is done. We don't just like stop there. So every year we need to get continuing, it's called continuing education, but basically we get training every year to make sure that we are up to date on newest evidence and basically that we're not doing our clients a disservice by continuing to use old and outdated shit and all that stuff. So in all of this training that I've done after finishing grad school, I've focused on trauma and I focused on anxiety. And so what my clients are struggling with the most is often anxiety and trauma, because that's just what we do. So that's what I often see with my clients most. There's a question about if I take suggestions on what games to play, and yes, I do. I have compiled a list, this like a Word document, spreadsheet of games that you guys have recommended, and when I'm ready to play a new game, I take a look at that. A lot of them I've already actually bought. They're just kind of like waiting to be played because I need to have the time to both record and edit videos. And so when I have the time to play another game, I look at that list. It's getting fairly long, but I plan to look at all of those games at least at some point. There's a question about my favorite games. And if you look just at the hours played, which I know consoles don't fully keep track of, but I'm going by gut instinct when it comes to console games, or games that I've played on the console. But according to Steam, I just looked, I have 2,500 hours in Final Fantasy XIV, so apparently that's one of my favorite games. I play it with a friend of mine, and I like the community aspect of it, but then sometimes I get bored and then I stop playing it for a while. I am also absolutely in love with Final Fantasy XV. Probably played it 5 times. The game definitely has its flaws, but I like the character building with it. I don't want to say too much in case you haven't played it. I am always a sucker for good character development and well-developed stories. So Ghost of Tsushima, oh, I loved that game. Oh, I loved it so much. But Final Fantasy XV is something where it... How do I describe it? Final Fantasy XV is something where it developed these characters. It starts off very lighthearted. You spend so much time with them at these campsites, and so you get to get some sense of their personalities. And all that time that you spend with them, it helps with the character development. And it starts off lighthearted, and it's not. I mean, not in the sense that Amori is, but in the sense that you have this character who starts off being very selfish and flat out refuses to do things, and by the end of it has a change to where he is willing to sacrifice himself in a way that is completely different. And the goodbye scene at the end makes me cry every single time. It is so sad. So sad. And those kinds of moments where you have characters say goodbye knowing what's going to happen always get me. Always get me. The end of Titanic, sad for that reason too. Ugh. So Final Fantasy 15, I've probably played it 5 times. I always cry. Every single time. Oh, always cry. So, PlayStation 4 doesn't tell me the playtime, at least last time I looked, so I can't tell you exactly how long I've played that game, but it is probably an astronomical amount of time. I'm a little afraid. So as far as playtime goes, those are the games that I've played the most. I usually play a game for story first, and then if I like the story, I'll play it again on a harder difficulty. If the difficulty is too high in the beginning, I often just put it down with the intention of starting back up, and then I never do. There's a question about if my work is stressful and if I've ever considered a different career. And I haven't ever really considered a different career altogether, just because, again, my job is so versatile, or my license, my degree, it's so versatile, I can just switch to something else. So I've never really considered a different job altogether. When I think about it, I think some of the most stressful parts of my job are stuff that isn't actually with clients. It's stuff like paperwork, making sure my paperwork's done on time. I hate it. Working with insurance companies is the worst. Oh, it's so complicated. It hurts my brain. It's all of those type of behind the scenes stuff that is, in my opinion, way more stressful than what happens actually in a therapy session. But all that behind the scenes stuff is important. So for example, if I just refuse to return a phone call to an insurance company or whatever it is, that doesn't help my client. So I do all those things because of my clients, but they're still awful. That's the worst part of my job, is all that other stuff. Ooh, there's a question about what is my greatest weakness as a therapist. I was thinking about this, and I think one of the biggest ones that pops up for me is the fact that when I'm done with my work, I'm done. There's a certain part of the day where I'm not checking emails anymore, not answering my phone. And that also means I don't read books, which sounds awful, but I'm not. So sometimes I'll have a client who will ask me, oh, hey, do you have a book recommendation about, I don't know, anxiety, trauma, whatever, relationships, communication? And my answer is no. Because if I'm reading therapy books or whatever, books about anything, that feels like I'm doing work outside of work, and I mentally can't do that. I just can't. I really try to do what I can to prevent myself from getting burnt out. And if I end my work day, so I'm done meeting with clients, I'm done with all the paperwork bullshit, and then I start reading stuff that feels like work, I feel like that's going to burn me out. So 99% of the time, if someone asks me for a book recommendation about anything related to therapy, I don't have a good answer for them. I might Google it and see what the internet says, but that's not the same as me recommending it, and then I'm hesitant to recommend that book. So I don't know therapy books. That's probably a big one. There's a question about any other kind of content that I want to do in the future, and I don't really know about that one. I started this channel really wanting to talk more about mental health, especially in video games, because I don't feel like that conversation happens a lot or anywhere else. And so I don't really have any other plans. I feel like if there are things that you guys want me to talk about, I'm pretty open to that. If there are things I can talk about, I feel like mentally I would put that on my list, kind of like the games list that I have. So I feel like at this point I'm pretty open to feedback. All the things that I get feedback on, will they happen? I don't know. but I'm at least open to the feedback. There's a question on here about what game can I most personally identify with the most because of my own experiences. And anything that deals with grief, I feel like, is something that hits me the hardest on a personal level. Just because I've lost people who are close to me, and I know I can't be the only one. Grief is something that is a universal human experience. It is one of the few things in life that is guaranteed. It fucking sucks. I'm not quite sure what else to say about that. There's a question. What is something you wish you really understood? And my first thought is people. As much as my education has prepared me to know maybe like general trends of people, I don't think I will ever understand people. My frustration with that comes from hearing stories of people telling me what friends have done to them or family has done to them and how much it hurts them. And sometimes I've told people, like friends in my life, that I hate people. And they'll look at me and they'll say, "How can you hate people, Danielle? You're a therapist." But I wish I understood why people could be cruel to another, or why parents could sometimes make choices that hurt their kids. And some of it maybe I can understand, like the cycles of abuse that happen, or generational trauma, like I can conceptually understand that. But it still fucking sucks. And that's the kind of stuff that I wish that I could understand or know more about, or even know more about how to change it. And this is, of course, the kind of stuff there is no real answer to. There's no magic pill that could stop it all. But it is always hard when people are making not so nice choices to another, and it causes damage. That's the kind of thing that sometimes I wish I could understand, or even wanting to know how to make that hurt heal faster than what we already know. There are also a lot of questions about my favorites. So, really quickly, favorite color, purple or black? Favorite food, shrimp fettuccine alfredo, absolutely. Favorite superhero, Batman, obviously. There's a question about my favorite vegetable. Does a potato count? Because potato chips, pretty bomb. If it's a favorite green fruit though, or favorite green veggie, broccoli? And for our final question, someone asked if I was going to post longer videos, and I'm going to try, but I am limited by how much time I have as far as the work that I do, and I not only have to record a video, but edit it. So I'm going to do what I can, especially for the Amori. This feels like a good place to stop though. If I didn't answer your question, I'll respond to your original comment with an answer for you, and I will see you guys in the next video.